Sanity is a fragile balancing act that as humans we manage to pull off near flawlessly. Our sanity is something so ingrained into our lives that it's something we barely ever think about. Our world and our perceptions of it are rarely ever shaken by the knowledge of things outside our understanding. But the universe is so large and unknowable that even questions that are relatively basic have terrifying answers that we don't like to think about. Arthur C. Clarke famously said that there are two options. We are alone in the universe, or we aren't, and that both are equally terrifying. But there are so many concepts even simpler than that with answers we can't know for sure. Time. Does it stretch on into the past infinitely, or was there a point where it started? These questions we may never have the answers to, and thinking about them is sometimes difficult, but sanity is the boat that lets us glide over the river of madness without ever falling into its dark black depths. Madness is a large part of cosmic horror, and the way it's portrayed in Lovecraft's work is usually of someone who's seen too much. Last time I told you about the fear of the unknown. Well, now it's time to process what you've seen. Imagine you're an ant stumbling onto a circuit board. To you, it's just strange terrain, dark and metallic with bizarre growths on it. It means nothing of importance to you, and why should it? It's just a different type of ground. But then you are cursed with the knowledge of what it is and what it can do. Terrible vistas of things beyond your previous comprehension are bestowed upon you, and you see the universe in a different light as your ant brain comprehends information and emotions leagues above it. And then as quickly as it was given, it's taken away, and you're an ant again. The things you've seen stay with you as a shadow of a memory. You know what you saw, even if you can no longer understand it like you once did. Awakening from a dream of higher understanding to the ignorance of your everyday life with memories you can't forget. How do you return to your normal life seeing the things you've seen? You can talk to others about it, but they will never understand it like you once did. It's not difficult to understand why the concept of madness is frightening, and while some pieces of media may glamorize it, it is the loss of the self, letting go of the reins of reality, and you're left to float endlessly in a suffering that isn't apparent to you. Madness, like the indescribable, is difficult to experience in horror games, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been attempted. Amnesia: The Dark Descent has its famous sanity meter, as does Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, and whilst the effects that can befall you are intense and sometimes frightening, they're not the same as losing your mind. Seeing the world warp and contort is just the game telling you to do something. It's not affecting you, the player, and in a way it never can. Things like the doors leading to different places than they went to before, and bizarre locations made up of glitches and other things you won't encounter in real life are unique to the video game medium, and whilst for a brief moment you might experience some doubt, there's not enough to these elements to ever trick a player into thinking they're losing their mind. True madness is unobtainable, and for good reason. You can't have a game that literally drives you insane. While subtlety can help convince a player that there's something horribly wrong with objects not being where they were before, like Clarence from Penumbra moving doors or making a friend look like an enemy, sooner or later a player will realize they're being messed with, and along with it, sanity is restored. So how do you present madness in a game? In Dead Space 2, Isaac Clarke has lost his mind due to the exposure he had to the marker, and what you experience is the haunting ghost of his dead girlfriend Nicole, as well as messages sent to his brain that he doesn't understand, which is a running theme in cosmic horror media. Powerful beings trying to get through to you in a way you aren't developed enough to comprehend. In Dead Space 2, these are often just visual effects or another chance for Nicole to scare the player with her great scripted events. It's important to note that most of these examples aren't caused by seeing the infinite or the indescribable. Some are about more traditional psychological and emotional traumatic things. Most of the first half of the film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, has scenes about people who receive a maddening image in their mind of a place they're meant to go to, but they don't know where it is or what's really being conveyed to them, and they obsess over it to the point that it ruins their lives. And this is the same for a lot of protagonists of Lovecraft stories, plagued by nightmares of things they don't understand. Prince of Darkness does something similar, with the students studying in the church, all having shared nightmares whilst in the vicinity of the Green Tube I mentioned in the last video. It clearly means something, but they just don't understand what it is. Nightmares and visions is one of the most common ways to convince a player that their character is going insane. Games like Alice Madness Returns and Darkwood allow you to enter the nightmare as a playable area and explore them up close, with the vast majority of Alice Madness Returns taking place in her broken and twisted version of Wonderland, which has enough imagery to paint a picture of the things that haunt her. And Darkwood enables something similar, with howling, impossible areas that really feel like your mind is preying on your weaknesses. Or maybe, like the rest of the environment, you're being corrupted too. In Martha is Dead, you begin to see the derailment of Julia's sanity in the actions she performs, which you can't seem to back out of, and it's almost frightening to behold in the way that her logic, however twisted to the player, is the only logical thing to do in her eyes. You often ask yourself if things really happened, and the game's story becomes convoluted as he tries to piece together the difference between dreams and reality. In Bloodborne, there's Mikolash, who tried to make contact with the Great Ones of that game, and seems to have caused himself to slip into what we might call insanity. His attempts at opening his eyes to a greater understanding are somehow unsettling and incomprehensible, and like the truly unenlightened, if we don't understand it, we better kill it before it does something dangerous. There are a lot of ways to portray madness, from the weird actions of others to nightmares, visions, sanity meters and other things. But like the indescribable, it's impossible to experience yourself. You can't see what they saw, you can't know what they know, and this is where isolation begins. Whilst it's maddening to know things you shouldn't, it's isolating to not know things they do. When you arrive in the fishing town of Innsmouth in Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth, it's very apparent that you're being shunned and ignored. You're the outsider, the one they don't want to talk to or let in. This theme reflects back on Lovecraft and his life, which was mostly spent in isolation, and his works are full of lonely protagonists on the edge of sanity. It's very difficult to not paint yourself into these scenarios when your emotions are this raw, and Lovecraft was no different. Nearly all of the games and movies I've mentioned have some level of isolation. Nobody understands what Isaac Clarke is going through in Dead Space 2. Roy Neary, the main character in Close Encounters, drives away his family with his bizarre actions thanks to the messages sent to his brain, leaving him alone. Darkwood and Alice Madness Returns also feature lonely protagonists. Madness and isolation follow themselves into an infinite spiral. With a film like The Lighthouse, where the isolation of being a lighthouse keeper on so remote of a location seemingly leads the two men to madness, with you questioning what's really happening. Is this supernatural, or is this psychological? There's a higher chance of your sanity deteriorating with no one to confirm what you've seen or reassure you that you're okay. Sanity is a fragile thing. A balancing act so fine that tipping the scales is easier than anyone would expect. And to witness the infinite, to fear the unfathomable, how are you supposed to tell someone what you've seen when you aren't sure yourself? Thank you for watching today's video. There is yet one last and final part of the trilogy, and I hope that you've enjoyed the series so far. As usual, a big thanks to the patrons, and feel free to check out Discord if you want to talk about horror games or films.